Night training had settled over the ridge like a sheet of muted gray, wind dragging thin lines of dust across stacked weapon cases. The light towers hummed unevenly, bulbs flickering against an empty stretch of desert. A steel target sensor died with a soft crack, screen blinking red before going silent. Seals turned, annoyed, convinced it was another glitch. It was not. A single round had punched through a corner plate impossibly precise, threaded through smoke and shifting wind at a distance no one had dialed for tonight. Who did that? That shot was not even in the firing window, Lieutenant Mason Rourke barked, voice carrying across the open ground. No one answered. Boots shifted. Someone cleared their throat. Silence gathered, heavy and unmoving. Behind a stack of crates, Staff Sergeant Elena Ryland stood still, posture straight, expression unreadable. Gray smoke drifted from where a suppressed shot still hung low over the berm, fading into cold air. She said nothing, no claim, no hint of ownership. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss these true stories of courage. And tell us in the comments where you are watching from today. Elena arrived just after dusk, walking alone along the gravel path that led toward the firing line. No transport vehicle dropped her off, no partner walked beside her, and no introductions were offered in her direction. She moved quietly beneath the tall floodlights, carrying a battered deployment pack that looked as though it had seen more weather than any standard-issue kit should. The straps were frayed, corners grayed from repeated dust and rain, edges spotted where salt water had dried and faded over time. Her boots were clean but worn along the sides, and she walked with the unhurried steps of someone who had neither urgency nor curiosity about whether anyone turned their head. People noticed her anyway. Eyes followed briefly, then moved past her. The assumption was predictable. A freshly arrived female staff sergeant traveling alone did not look like someone called here to instruct a SEAL detachment. Most believed she was a clerical attachment or public affairs personnel, maybe there to record training metrics or take attendance. Someone whispered that exact line, not intending it to carry, but sound travels differently when silence owns the ground. She did not react. Her gaze stayed ahead, her posture steady, and when she reached the table where gear bags lay, she began preparing her equipment without a word. She tightened her gloves first, pulling them snug against her wrists. She wiped dust from the cloth that covered her scope and folded it carefully before setting it beside her rifle case. She took no shortcuts, no rushed movements. She arranged gear with slow precision, as though repetition had carved grooves into her muscles that needed no thought. Each adjustment was quiet, unremarkable, but unmistakably deliberate. Private Jordan Wells approached her with the anxious half-confidence of someone new enough to still introduce himself to strangers. He stood near, clearing his throat once, then a second time. When he finally spoke, she turned just slightly, not startled, not bothered, simply acknowledging presence. He introduced himself, stumbling over the rank title, voice light and uncertain. She answered softly, her reply carrying calm tone with almost no inflection. Wells nodded too quickly, unsure what to say next, and stepped back again. Her voice had been polite, but light enough that it barely carried. That single exchange reinforced what people thought. Quiet meant unsure, reserved meant inexperienced, and humility meant lack of exposure. What they missed was how her eyes scanned lighting angles without lifting her head fully, how she watched dust trails move across open ground, how she counted seconds between gust intervals without writing anything down. None of that resembled clerical responsibility. It resembled someone who learned long ago how wind sounded before shifting direction. She looked young despite being 29. Small-framed, thin shoulders beneath her jacket, uniform sleeves rolled without crease, hair tied cleanly behind her head. Nothing about her posture projected power or combat-earned presence. No visible patches lined her sleeves except the standard unit identifiers, except for one small mark faded along a seam just beneath her vest. It was barely visible unless light hit it from the side. A faded Sierra Recon emblem, ghosted, not fresh. No rookie would own something that old without having earned it. Her rangefinder did not match current issue either. It was scratched, older generation, casing dulled by weather and use. Someone scoffed gently, assuming outdated gear implied lack of access or priority. But scratched equipment rarely belonged to support staff. Scratches come from terrain, not desks. Sergeant First Class Tyler McRae noticed it. He kept walking, offering no greeting, making no introduction. His eyes flicked toward that rangefinder once, then away again. He knew what marks like that meant. He said nothing, because some people deserve silence more than welcome. There were whispers near the briefing canopy. Someone mentioned that she came off some mountain unit, not confirmed. Someone else claimed she had once been part of a winter training detachment. Another voice laughed, saying those stories circulated every few months about someone new. Elena kept working through gear calibrations. She folded gauze tape around a cracked stock insert so that firing recoil would not scrape exposed palm skin. She pressed windscreen buttons with the back of her glove so the surface would not shine. She knelt briefly to align her tripod legs because uneven terrain affected vibration even through suppressed shots. None of her actions seemed special to anyone watching casually. To someone who had fired in unstable terrain before, it was the opposite. Small corrections matter most under pressure. Wells returned once more, standing awkwardly close, saying he had heard she was supposed to assist with scoring data. She nodded as though accepting the assumption. He walked away, satisfied with his conclusion. That was her strength. She never corrected wrong narratives. Letting others underestimate was easier than explaining truth. The last sliver of daylight dimmed, giving way to the artificial glow of floodlights. Wind thickened, shifting direction every few breaths. Elena opened a small notebook, not standard log pages, but hand-drawn reference lines showing bullet-drop curves across incline angles. She didn't write anything, just reviewed a page and tucked it away. McRae moved past her a final time. He paused only long enough to see how her glove rested against the rifle stock, not gripping, just settled lightly. People who only shoot in daylight grip tightly. People who shoot at night learn different habits. As the ridge grew colder, she stepped away from the table and walked toward the open sand path. A gust hit, and she tilted her head slightly, timing its end. She raised her palm, lifted dust with her fingertips, let it fall, then nodded once. Calibration complete. Alone, unannounced, uncelebrated. Others talked, laughed, and argued about zeroing issues. Elena remained still, breath-controlled, eyes quiet behind fading smoke. Later, they would learn why that mattered. But not tonight. Not yet. ChatGPT said. Rourke stepped into the center of the firing line with the commanding posture of someone used to being obeyed without hesitation. Training had begun, and he wanted a clean demonstration for the SEAL team's evaluation. He called shooters forward one at a time, establishing a sequence based on seniority. Elena was placed last bottom slot, he phrased it. We'll give her a shot at the end if time allows. Nobody objected. Nobody expected anything. The first two shooters dialed wind compensation incorrectly. The gust rolling across the ridge shifted unexpectedly, carrying grit that scraped against kneeling mats. The first SEAL fired early, missing left of center plate. Someone laughed. Rourke brushed the error aside. Hurry up, adjust and fire again. The second shooter misread drop and hit lower edge plating, sensor glitching for half a second. The group shook their heads. Someone whistled sarcastically. When it was Elena's turn, no one even moved aside to clear space for her. She stepped forward, lifted her rifle without resting elbows against the table, and knelt, not prone like everyone else. She inhaled once, paused, then pressed the trigger with no visible stabilization check. Her suppressed shot cracked low and clean, barely louder than the wind. The sensor blinked fully green. No one responded. No praise, no acknowledgement, nothing resembling credit. Someone muttered that the second gust probably helped her. Someone else claimed it was luck. Elena simply reset the bolt, lowered the barrel, and moved backward. Another shooter challenged elevation marks, adjusting his optic loudly, confident he would land a better shot. He fired, missed wide, and the dust plume revealed crosswind vector shift. Elena turned slightly, made an adjustment that looked too small to matter, but when she fired again, the impact registered exact center. Silence didn't come immediately. It arrived slowly. Someone asked, sarcastically, if she had pre-measured that angle earlier. She did not answer. She checked nothing. No new tape, no fresh notes, no rangefinder display. She only looked into the wind and fired again. Direct hit. Rourke wasn't impressed. Anyone can match shots on repeat, he said, projecting more confidence than certainty. Real performance comes under shifting wind and zero visibility. The tone suggested doubt, not guidance. He paced behind the shooters, then stopped near Elena. His voice fell just loud enough for others to hear. You ever actually deploy with an operational team, Staff Sergeant, or just run classroom tables? She said nothing. He expected pushback, some defensive statement, maybe even nervous justification. Instead, she turned her bipod slightly, removed the elevation sleeve from her optic, and set it aside. She was choosing to shoot without default markers. That silence unsettled him more than argument would have. Wells watched from 3 spaces down, rubber earbands still looped loosely around his neck. He noticed her breathing. Not deep inhale, not timed exhale, but stillness before movement. She didn't breathe at trigger press. She didn't blink either. His expression changed slowly, eyes narrowing, as he realized he had never seen anyone ignore respiratory timing so calmly. The others didn't notice yet. They were still laughing between turns. Light laughter, not mean-spirited, just confident noise. Rourke called another shooter forward. The shot landed too low. Another followed. Off-center again. No adjustments fixed anything. Then, Elena stepped into open space for her next round. She raised the rifle, not rushing, not scanning for permission. Wind shifted again, noticeably this time. A cold roll swept across the ridge, lifting dust, pulling canvas straps sideways. Instead of remeasuring, she simply adjusted her cheek position and pulled the trigger. Direct center hit. The wind had changed. She had not. Someone stopped laughing. Not all at once. Not dramatic. Just fewer voices, shorter comments. People looked outward instead of toward each other. Wells stepped closer, watching her glove move. He saw she wasn't flinching. Her posture didn't look like recoil affected her at all. It wasn't strength. It was familiarity. Rourke stepped in again. You know, Staff Sergeant, rumor is you came off a deployment rotation, but I haven't seen a record attached. Which mountain unit was it again? Or is that story just floating around? She tightened her glove only slightly. No answer. Rourke smirked. Confident silence meant fabrication. Someone next to him nodded, already convinced. But Wells knew silence didn't mean surrender. It meant restraint. The wind tilted again, hitting at a sharper diagonal. The SEAL shooter next in line asked for new wind numbers. Elena looked up, not at him, not at Rourke, just into the air, then shifted the angle of her bipod leg by half an inch. No rangefinder. No recalculation. The next shot landed center again. Someone finally whispered, "That's not random?" The laughter faded. Not fully, but enough to change atmosphere. Soldiers notice when someone isn't operating from chance. Wells caught himself studying her hands again. He realized something he had not seen earlier. She wasn't squeezing the stock. She relaxed against it, letting recoil become part of forward movement. Someone who fired against unstable surfaces learned that. What would you have done in that moment? The narrator would have asked. Would you have stayed quiet or spoken up? Rourke stepped ahead of her, raised his hand, and called for range halt. Full smoke, he said. Bunches of colored smoke canisters rolled forward. If she's as accurate as you think she is, he added, let's see it when nobody sees anything. He assumed she would fail. Others assumed the same. Wells did not. He just watched her step into drifting smoke, steady posture returning like it belonged there. The ridge fell quiet again, but not with confidence. Only expectation of collapse. Training wasn't over. But the room of noise had already thinned into silence. Smoke rolled across the ridge in thick columns, settling low enough to blur every target marker into faint silhouettes. The wind pushed the smoke sideways, then back again, never giving a consistent opening. It wasn't a flashy tactical moment, just a difficult one, visibility thinning into patches, outlines dissolving into shifting haze. Grenade casings clattered somewhere off to the right, where someone kicked them out of the firing lane. Target sensors flickered, lights blinking beneath fog that swallowed everything. Rourke repositioned 2 center targets under a low-angle lamp, reducing contrast, so even when smoke thinned, the lamps reflected poorly across the steel. Nobody liked this setup. It favored familiarity with terrain, not training manuals. Elena stepped forward without questioning placement, rifle folded against her shoulder like memory rather than technique. Every shooter ahead of her went prone. Flat bodies along mats, elbows locked, toes pushing against gravel. The surface was cold, and grit layered under their sleeves. Elena didn't match them. She knelt, one knee down, one raised, upper body upright, not parallel. The position looked inefficient, unstable. Someone muttered that kneeling wasn't appropriate for this distance. Someone else remarked it was poor retention posture. She offered nothing in response. McCrae noticed first. The way she sat wasn't improvised, it was repeatable geometry. He had seen it once years back, during live training under avalanche threat. A kneeling shot keeps torso ahead of cold wind, makes recoil less likely to sink the barrel into unstable terrain. He didn't say that out loud. He only stared a few seconds too long, then walked off. Wells stood near her flank, still pretending not to watch. He saw her inhale half a breath. Not deep, not full, just a controlled fraction. She held it. Then her finger eased forward, but didn't press. She waited for wind direction shift, not for clearance call. That timing wasn't classroom instruction. That was adaptation rhythm. He leaned forward to get angle on her face. Calm profile. No tightness at the jaw. No blinking against drifting embers of smoke. He tried mimicking her breathing pattern quietly and realized his chest shook after 2 seconds. Hers didn't shake at all. "That's not standard Army range technique," someone whispered behind them. It wasn't an insult. It was confusion disguised as opinion. McCrae didn't respond, but the hint of recognition in his posture confirmed the observation. Whoever Elena had been before this assignment wasn't a blank page. Smoke thickened again. Her rifle remained steady. She never reset bipod alignment. She didn't look through the optic again before preparing to fire. Standard procedure demands recheck after smoke level changes. She skipped it entirely, not out of arrogance, but familiarity. She waited, not for clearance, not for adjustment calls, just for rhythm of wind. Wells squinted through a gap. She wasn't aiming where the target last sat, she was aiming slightly above where it should reappear through haze. That wasn't guessing. That was tracking loss and anticipating reveal. He didn't know how to describe it, but he understood it wasn't something anyone taught at standard schoolhouses. Someone coughed behind them. Boots scraped. A range light flickered. Elena leaned forward half an inch. It wasn't dramatic. It was barely movement. But Wells saw her eyes shift along the invisible line where wind might break. He felt his shoulders tense, not understanding why. Nobody had announced target confirmation. Nobody updated wind call. Rourke hadn't given firing sequence. Yet her posture locked. Suspicion simmered across the firing line, not voiced, not named, but present. Elena was not following range protocol. She was moving like someone repeating what they had once survived, operating from memory rather than instruction. She exhaled, half-length again, waiting, not hesitating, just remembering. And that silence, the kind that wasn't indecision, settled deeper than the smoke itself. Rourke stepped toward the firing line, irritation showing through a tightened jaw. The earlier hits had unsettled him more than he would admit, so he decided to remove doubt by increasing difficulty. Timed engagement, he called out. No one had prepared for it, no one expected it, and some frowned at the abrupt format change. 3 targets, 5 seconds apart. Full smoke. No target callouts, just muzzle discipline and situational awareness. Someone muttered that no one trained at that timing without pre-coordinates. Rourke ignored it. He stepped back, lifted his tablet, and began setting the sequenced illumination. "SEAL team rifle up first," he ordered. A shooter moved forward, confident posture, strong stance. Elena stood behind, not adjusting her rifle, not refreshing her scope, not reseating her cheek weld. She just waited. Her knee posture hadn't changed. Her breathing hadn't changed either. The countdown began. The first target lit itself across the haze, barely visible through rolling smoke. The shooter fired fast and struck somewhere near center. The sensor blinked green. Laughter followed. The second target illuminated, and the shooter recalculated drop. Wind shifted sharply between clearing pockets and dense fog. He fired, missed wide. Steel clanged on rock behind target line. The third target lit. He overcorrected, compensating too much, and struck edge plating. The group still clapped. Someone joked that he got greedy. Rourke nodded, not displeased. Next. Another shooter stepped up. First hit was acceptable, second one low, third too late. Timing 6 seconds, not 5. Rourke dismissed the attempt. We're not here for close enough. Silence spread. Nobody was relaxed anymore. Then it was Elliot's, no Staff Sergeant Elena Ryland's turn. Rourke kept her last again, making no attempt to hide assumption that she would not succeed. Staff Sergeant, if you're participating, his tone suggested she wasn't required. She only stepped forward and lowered to her knee again, same position, same quiet steadiness. Smoke was reshuffled, new grenades thrown. Someone coughed as fumes thickened. McCrae stood behind her now, not close, but still in viewing angle. Wells moved slightly toward her flank as though pulled without deciding. Rourke tapped the screen, triggering sequence. First target flared weak yellow. She did not hesitate. Her rifle cracked softly, suppressed enough that most only heard the slap against sandberm. The plate lit immediately, a single direct center hit. The second target lit at an angle, barely visible through heavy drifting vapor. Wind pushed sideways again, harder than earlier. She didn't shift optic elevation. She didn't change stance height. She didn't even blink. Second shot. Impact. The target sensor flashed green dead center. Voices stopped mid-breath. Wind changed a third time. Stronger now. Not predictable. Not gradual. Sharp, sideways push. Before anyone processed shift, before someone recalculated direction, Elena already fired her third shot. Not into the lighted center. Into darkness. Because smoke drift hadn't yet cleared exposure frame. She fired before the target was clearly visible. No one understood what she was aiming at. Then the third plate flicked bright. Dead center. 3 plates in sequence. 3 impacts inside time threshold. Not one adjustment. Not one recalculation. No rangefinder check. No audible breath cycle. Someone whispered too loudly, "What was that? That isn't..." But no word followed. No celebration occurred. No cheering. No acknowledgement. Only disbelief. Not dramatic disbelief. The slow type that grows when eyes cannot find errors to explain away. The next seconds felt stretched. Wind gusted again. Smoke continued drifting. Elena didn't look at her hits, didn't examine target plates, didn't allow the moment to mean anything. She stepped back and lowered her rifle like nothing of value had happened. Captain Hale, SEAL officer overseeing evaluation, walked closer, not trusting what he'd just witnessed. His face was stern, not angry, but unsettled. He had seen shooters land good sequences before, under difficult wind, in complex conditions. But timing, wind shifts, and total lack of recalibration? That didn't align with training. He looked at Rourke, then at the plates, then back at the firing line. "Who did that?" he asked loudly, because only Rourke and 2 observers stood nearest firing order. Nobody answered. That silence wasn't embarrassment. It was confusion. Then he raised his voice further. "Who took those 3 rounds?" Nobody spoke. Nobody volunteered. Because nobody could rationalize it. Even the shooter in front of her, the one who missed, stared with half disbelief, half silence. He had no joke ready, no excuse ready, no casual comment. Rourke finally looked toward Elena, expression flat. "Staff Sergeant, that your string?" She didn't nod, didn't confirm, didn't lift her chin. She simply stood still, hand resting near rifle grip, not claiming anything. Wind softened again. A small pocket of clear air opened across the ridge. Smoke thinned just enough for the 3 steel plates to show visible impact indentations, clustered too tight to represent 3 different attempts. Wells moved forward slightly, hands locked behind his vest strap. His eyes bounced between plates and her glove. Nobody understood timing. Nobody understood why she fired before illumination. Nobody understood how she found second and third plates through fog. She did nothing to explain it. Someone behind whispered, "Could be device pre-recording. I've seen instructors simulate shots." "That wasn't simulation," someone else answered. Rourke walked forward to inspect plates. All 3 center hits weren't just center. They were offset sequentially, patterns slanted diagonally in ascending spacing, meaning she compensated not only distance but lateral drift as wind built across sequence. That wasn't static marksmanship. That was rolling correction. He turned toward her. His tone was calculated, not praising and not dismissing. "Where'd you learn that?" She wiped dust from her scope cloth, folded it, returned it to pouch, and didn't lift her eyes. That was answer enough. Not arrogance, not secrecy, just refusal to embellish. Hale lowered the rig tablet. "Run it again," he said quietly. "Same smoke, same spacing," someone protested. "Nobody hits 3 under shifting wind twice. That's random luck." Hale didn't react. "Run it again." Smoke rolled forward once more. Fresh grenades deployed, thickening air until ridge was swallowed in gray and green trails. Visibility shrank below rifle length. Sensor lights flickered against floating debris. The ridge lights hummed. And this time, Elena stepped forward before anyone called her name. She didn't wait. Not for instructor cue. Not for firing order. She positioned knee downward again, set rifle against shoulder, and waited. No words exchanged. No attention requested. Sequence engaged. Target 1 lit, she fired first center again. Target 2 appeared. She fired half-second early center again. Target 3 appeared. She fired a full second early, then sensor activated and lit green. Wells whispered, "No way," not realizing his voice carried. Nobody clapped. Nobody congratulated. Nobody teased. There wasn't room for humor. Not after seeing something that did not align with standard infantry skills or conventional sniper school habits. Smoke cleared fraction by fraction. Her silhouette appeared first, then rifle profile, then kneeling posture. She didn't adjust strap, didn't tap trigger guard, didn't shift to standing posture. She stood slowly, collected her kit, and moved aside. Everything about her movement said she had done it before, under worse conditions, in places where nobody had watched. And she walked back into haze again. Quiet, unclaimed, unrevealed. This wasn't her reveal, just the shift. The point where disbelief became silence, and silence became curiosity. Chief Warrant Officer David Avery arrived without announcement, walking along the path that cut behind the firing line. He wasn't part of training rotation. He was retrieving documents from a field case assigned to the SEAL detachment, a procedural handoff, nothing more. He stepped out from the canopy glow and into thinning smoke, carrying the black case under one arm, glancing toward the equipment table to verify serial tags. Then he stopped. Not because of paperwork, but because Elena, still kneeling, had taken that same position again as she packed gear into her deployment bag. Wind carried thin smoke strands across her silhouette, bending low around her profile. Avery paused mid-step, shoes half buried in gravel. "You still shoot kneeling," he said quietly, not loud enough to be instruction, not soft enough to be mistaken as memory, just like you did on Vesper Ridge. It was a sentence spoken into the air, not aimed at her, not aimed at anyone. Everyone heard it. Every head turned. Rourke lifted his eyes first, not defensive, but searching. McCrae froze, already connecting what he had suspected earlier. Wells stared straight at Avery, mouth slightly parted, not understanding context, but realizing that moment mattered. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed deeply. Elena paused, one strap of her bag still hanging off the table. She didn't flinch, didn't turn, only lowered the strap gently onto the fabric. Avery stepped forward, closing the distance slowly, as though approaching history rather than a person. He wasn't looking for confirmation. He already knew. He stopped in front of her, not directly, just close enough that dust settled in the space between. "You held line through night 37, he said, voice steady but thin. "Wind shear every 8 minutes. Visibility 0. Remember?" She did not answer. She did not need to. Her silence was acknowledgement. Hale stepped beside Rourke, brow tightening, tone shifting from power to shock. "Wait, that was you?" The question was barely audible, because everyone already knew the answer. Avery shifted weight, not rigid, not ceremonial, just human. Then he raised his hand, slow, deliberate, and saluted. He didn't salute rank. He didn't salute instruction. He saluted survival, endurance, memory of a ridge where people had waited for rescue that never truly came, except through a single firing line that held ground. Elena didn't return the salute. She didn't need to. Recognition was complete without reciprocation. Someone in the group stepped backward. Someone else lowered their rifle. Somebody's fingers opened from a tight grip they hadn't realized they held. Silence didn't arrive suddenly. It grew, thickened, then settled, almost heavier than the smoke had been. Because now the shots, the timing, the kneeling stance, all of it had origin. Not training, not theory, not simulation. History. Real. Avery lowered his hand slowly and exhaled as though letting go of something held for too long. He said nothing further. Neither did she. Because sometimes truth doesn't require narration. Just silence. Avery did not tell a story. He didn't unfold the events or dramatize them. He spoke like someone remembering a place still cold in the back of his mind. She held the line through night 37, he said, almost to himself. Visibility was 0. Wind shear every 8 minutes. Nobody rotated out. She didn't step off that scope until we had extraction corridor open. He didn't list names. He didn't reference injuries. He didn't reveal count. He only placed truth where silence needed something real to settle into. That was enough. People started realizing what they had witnessed hours earlier wasn't performance, wasn't demonstration, wasn't talent emerging by chance. It was muscle memory shaped by nights long enough to stop boasting and leave only endurance. The same rounds that had cut through smoke tonight once cut through weather nobody would willingly walk into. Someone near the left firing mat lowered his rifle without making eye contact. Another quietly nodded toward her weapon case. The old cased rifle that didn't shine like new inventory. Rourke stepped forward, not with command in his shoulders, not with criticism. Just level voice. "You trained up north?" he asked, softer than before. Elena didn't answer. He didn't ask again. Something changed in his tone. Not apology, not surrender. Just understanding that some people earn identity long before any briefing begins. Captain Hale approached next, not aggressively, not demanding. He held an empty notebook in hand, the kind used for range notes. "Would you demonstrate that wind call method?" he asked. "Not authority anymore. Request." Elena shook her head once, polite refusal. "It won't translate here," she said. Hale stepped back, respecting boundary. Wells stood nearby, uncertain whether to say something, uncertain whether he belonged near her after what he just learned. His boots hesitated, toe grinding gravel lightly without intention. She walked toward him anyway, not dramatic, not meaningful in presentation, just forward. She didn't speak first. She adjusted his elbow gently, 2 fingers under sleeve seam, guiding arm down 1/2 inch. She shifted his supporting hand slightly forward and lowered his upper shoulder without force. He stood straighter without knowing why. "You breathe more than you aim," she said. "Reverse that." No audience instruction, no performance, just that. Wells swallowed. "Okay," he whispered, but his voice cracked because words never fit moments that feel larger than them. Avery turned away first, carrying file case beneath his arm. He didn't look back. He didn't need to see whether lesson landed. Rourke stayed still for a moment longer, then nodded. Not toward her, not toward Hale, but toward the truth of what he had just witnessed. Some SEALs stepped aside, clearing path without being asked. People didn't move in formation. They just opened space because some presence carries its own corridor. Elena gathered her gear with unceremonious precision. No rush. No indication she wanted credit for anything that happened. Wind cut low again, settling dust around empty casings scattered across mat. Floodlights hummed against night air, colder now than when training began. She lifted her rifle case by the handle, the old scratch mark catching faint light. Wells looked at it like someone memorizing shape of something they didn't understand yet but would one day learn. Nobody saluted her. Nobody clapped. And that was right. Respect does not arrive through applause. It arrives through quiet rearrangement of posture, shoulders straightening, voices lowering, interruptions stopping. She walked off range quietly. No spotlight. No call sign spoken aloud. Just the weight of a moment that stayed behind her like a trail of still air. Sometimes the most honest climax is not celebration. It is quiet. And quiet stretched wider than the ridge itself. Training concluded without ceremony. No announcement, no final briefing, no after-action debrief. People simply began packing their equipment, sliding bolts back into cases, folding mats, clearing brass from gravel. Voices were low, not because anyone had instructed silence, but because noise no longer felt appropriate. Floodlights flickered softer as generators cycled down, and wind moved loose paper targets along the ground. Wells remained near the empty firing lane, repeating her words under his breath, not even aware he was doing it. "You breathe more than you aim. Reverse that." He whispered it again, trying to understand timing of breath before settling his shoulder where she had placed it. He wasn't chasing her recognition. He was chasing precision that no printed manual had ever taught him. Rourke walked past her path on the way toward the gear racks. He didn't make a speech, didn't offer apology or praise. He stopped just long enough to look her direction. A subtle nod, not approval, not surrender, just recognition of truth he hadn't seen earlier. She acknowledged it with nothing more than steady eye contact, then continued stacking her gear. Elena didn't stay for discussion, didn't linger where admirers might gather. She lifted her pack strap over her shoulder, dust fine against fabric. No one walked beside her. No one followed. She moved across gravel toward the dim exit path, her footsteps fading before conversation returned. Wells stood straighter after she left. Training wasn't different. Only perspective was. Hale lowered his notebook, closing it without writing anything. There wasn't anything to document that would capture relevance. Narrator reflection would come softly. Some legends never introduce themselves. Their presence introduces them. Elena never raised her voice, never clarified history, never explained. But the lesson remained, unspoken, unembellished, unforgettable. And the ridge held silence long enough for everyone to know what they had witnessed. Not performance, not rivalry, not display. Just someone who stayed accurate when conditions tried to break alignment. Honor doesn't raise its voice. It simply stays accurate when others shake. There are stories that never make it into headlines. Stories carried quietly by people who never asked to be noticed. Tonight was one of them. If stories like these resonate with you, make sure to subscribe to Military and Veteran Stories so you never miss a moment of unseen courage. Tell us where you're watching from, whether it's a small town, a base overseas, or a place halfway across the map. Someone out there needs these stories to remember that quiet strength still exists, and sometimes the most extraordinary moments happen in silence.